Each year at Faith in Business, we have a theme that we survey in some depth. Last year, it was purpose. We explored personal and corporate purpose. This year, it's investment, and that's how I want to lead into the subject of stewardship, because the two themes are very much linked in my mind. There are various different definitions of investment, and I think the one found on Wikipedia is as good as any. It reads like this: investment is the dedication of an asset to attain an increase in value over a period of time. It requires the sacrifice of some precious asset, such as time, money, or effort. God is an investor. Have you ever heard anyone say that before? At Faith in Business, we really do believe that God is an investor. He has invested in his world. In the first chapter of the Bible, we find God investing a formless, dark, and empty earth with light and a profusion of plant and animal life. He has poured his personality, his effort, and vast eons of time into creating the amazing cosmos in which we live, an asset which he looked forward to evolving in a certain way. But he's invested particularly in human beings. It is only humans who are described as being made in the image of God. As Psalm 8 says, God has crowned us with glory and honor. The words vestment, investment, and investiture are linked. They all have the same root. God has clothed us with his very own image. That is the vestment or special piece of clothing that he has given us. What does it mean to be made in the image of God? I don't believe the image of God can be defined in a single characteristic that is unique to human beings. I believe rather it's a combination of characteristics. Our reasoning capacity, our sense of right and wrong, our ability to relate to our Creator and our fellow creatures. I think the image of God is also reflected in the things that God does. God is typically active in three main ways: as creator, sustainer, and redeemer. God makes things, he sustains things, and he repairs things. He repairs things at considerable cost, above all through Christ on the cross. When you stop to think about it, human beings do all these things too. Indeed, when you think about the various functions performed by business, most of them fit into these three categories: making, maintaining, and restoring. Have a think about the business that you're most closely involved in. What category does it fit under? Making, maintaining, and restoring are all very worthwhile things to do, which contribute to the overall quality of life. Indeed, these are all types of business that may be well worth investing in. In Psalm 8, the statement that God has crowned men and women with glory and honor is followed by the verse, "You have given them dominion over the work of your hands. You have put all things under their feet. Sheep, beasts, birds of the air, and fish of the sea." And we find the same idea in Genesis 1, the creation mandate to be fruitful and multiply, to fill the earth and subdue it. And Genesis 2, God putting the man in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it, and then providing a female companion to help him do just that. From these verses flow the idea of human beings exercising stewardship over creation. God invested in human beings, wanting and expecting them to exercise that stewardship. His intention was that they would do this in harmony with him and be accountable to him. Human beings are in authority and under authority. In one of Jesus's parables in Luke 12, the steward, who was the manager of the household, has authority over the other servants, but he's under the authority of his master, the head or lord of the household. So you could call it a position of middle management. We are God's middle managers. In the process, of course, God took a huge risk, as many an investor does. The risk was that human beings would go their own way and refuse to accept their accountability. Indeed, far from enhancing the value of the asset that is God's creation, there was the danger that they might reduce or destroy that value. And that's one way of understanding the biblical story of the fall, human beings refusing to accept their accountability to God as stewards of his creation. A key aspect of stewarding creation concerns the development of the earth's resources. God has made a world that contains many resources which require some process of extraction, conversion, and refinement before they can be of benefit. Mineral deposits lie deep beneath the Earth's surface. Colossal effort with significant danger is involved in hewing and hauling them upwards. Although the mining of metals goes back a long way and is mentioned in the Hebrew scriptures in the books of Deuteronomy and Job, for instance, it could be argued that the rich resources of the earth were actually underexploited for millions of years. All this changed with the Industrial Revolution, which began 250 years ago. Key to that revolution was the extraction of coal, oil, and gas on which our modern world depends. In the 19th century, Britain was the foremost developer of these resources, the manufacturing center of the world. Since then, things have changed. Mineral extraction and manufacturing takes place in many countries, but China is now the center of global manufacturing. Wherever it has taken place, business is the primary vehicle through which the development of the world's resources takes place. We have to acknowledge that there are good and bad aspects to the way it has done this. We need to arrive at a balanced verdict. On the one hand, we must not be hypocritical. We welcome the improved standard of living that has come through these developments. Which of us would want to live in a world without electricity? Which of us would want to live in cities without clean water and sanitation, another product of industrial development, which is still the fate of many people in the poorer countries of the world? On the other hand, there is no doubt that many of these resources have been over-exploited and shared very unjustly. The people, including business people, were blind or indifferent to the danger and ugliness of pollution as they built their mines and factories, and that over the last 50 years, we have been very slow to act in response to the threats of climate change and global warming. So we're living with serious ecological damage. The upshot is that humanity's record as the part of creation in whom God most heavily invested is extremely mixed. We do have the ability to deliver the creation mandate responsively, creatively, and for the good of all. In 19th century England, there were some very positive examples of Christian entrepreneurs who bucked the common trend and were model caring employers, men like Cadbury, Clark, Rowntree, and Salt. We have a chapter about some of them in our book, A Voice to be Heard. But all too often, human beings have fulfilled the creation mandate of developing the world's resources in a way that is selfish, careless, destructive, and exploits other people. Before I come back to the challenge of how we should respond, I want to say something about our stewardship of time, money, and talents in a more personal way. Time, money, and talents are three God-given resources which we all have at our disposal. If you want three words beginning with T, you could have time, treasure, and talents. All of them need to be stewarded well. They need to be used wisely and not foolishly. They need to be used generously in the service of others. Take time, for instance. Many of us complain that we don't have enough time. I'm so busy, we say, perhaps to impress other people or to make an excuse for things we haven't done. But God gives us all the time we need. 24 hours in each day is surely sufficient. He gives us all the time we need to get done the things he wants us to get done. Think of the things you do each day which are actually a waste of time. Perhaps habits you've fallen into that you could really do without. For instance, lots of people waste time messing about on their mobile phone. One challenging area is that there are people who can waste your time, who talk a great deal, which amounts to very little. They waffle. This is a difficult one because we want to have time for people. It's part of Christian care, Christian love that we do so. But you mustn't get distracted from dealing with the things that really warrant your attention. When you retire, as I have, you find the challenge of not wasting time changes. Yes, I am under less pressure and I have more choice over the things that I do, but I still don't want to waste time. I can enjoy a more relaxed pace of life, but I still want to steward the time that God has given me well. At present, much of my time is spent doing unpaid work for two charities that I'm involved in. Faith in Business is one of them, plus my involvement in the church that my wife and I attend, as well as time spent being dutiful grandparents. In the psalmist's phrase, I seek to number my days, making good use of the days that remain to me, praying that God will continue to bless the work of my hands. There are lots of biblical passages which speak to our wise use of time, money, and talents. And the ones you see on the screen are just a selection. The book of Proverbs, which speaks of hard work, diligence, acquiring wealth gradually, and leaving wealth for your children, as well as giving generously to the poor. Ecclesiastes, which says that there is a time and season for everything. Wisdom resides in discerning when each season is. Ephesians 5, which tells us to make the most of the time. In the old King James translation, it's redeem the time. Redeem the time because the days are evil. There's a lot of evil going on, and we should be trying to put it right. And Matthew 25, where the parable of the talents is followed by the parable of the sheep and the goats. First, the story of the servants, two of whom trade successfully and multiply the money they've been given, and one who buries his money in the ground. This relates both to how we use money, but also to that wider category of skills and abilities we've come to call talents. Second, the story of how when we help support and show kindness to the many needy people in the world, hungry, thirsty, strangers, naked, sick, prisoners, we're actually showing kindness to Jesus himself. Two stories that might seem to teach very different lessons and are favored by people of very different types. One was the favorite biblical passage of Margaret Thatcher, our Conservative Prime Minister from the 1980s. The other of Mother Teresa, who you know from her work with destitute children. But two passages which are equally part of Jesus's precious teaching heritage to us. One encourages us to be hardworking, innovative, and entrepreneurial. The other encouraging us to be compassionate and generous. Put the two together, and you have a basis for social enterprise, a category of business that seeks to combine financial success with delivering benefits to needy groups in society. Let me return now to what we should be doing about the environmental crisis, which now confronts us because human beings have been poor stewards of creation. What should we do as business people, and what should we do as investors? Well, one of the reasons that gives me some hope is that many business people are facing up to the gravity of the current crisis. They're using their abilities to develop smart green technology. Bill Gates has written a book called How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, in which he gives lots of examples of this. They include wastewater treatment and converting waste to energy, elimination of industrial emissions, recycling plastic, solar panels and wind energy, electric cars, vertical gardens and farms. So if you're a business person at the early stage of your career, or an experienced business person looking for a new challenge, why not consider starting a new environmentally friendly business using one of these new technologies? And if you're a business person involved in a more standard area of business, can you make some aspects of your business greener, your sourcing of energy, for instance? A similar challenge applies to those of us who are not practicing business people, but who are interested in business and investing in business. We may not think of ourselves as business investors, but all of us who are consumers, holders of savings accounts, or beneficiaries of pension funds are making crucial decisions which affect the global economy. In the words of the marriage service, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, even affecting people's sickness and their health. With regard to our investments, we often don't feel involved in the crucial decisions because financial intermediaries make them on our behalf. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. We can invest directly in a company whose leadership we trust and about whose product we are enthusiastic. We can make our own choices about the investment fund in which we direct our money through participation in an organization like Interactive Investor. I recently invested a significant sum of money with an Asian ethical environmental fund through that method. You may be cautious about doing likewise because you think such investments are risky. Well, the verdict on ethical funds is that in the long term, they perform quite well. But at this point, I'd like to remind you of the second part of the Wikipedia's definition of investment. It is that investment requires the sacrifice of some precious asset, such as time, money, or effort. Note that word, sacrifice. One of the entrepreneurs that Kina and I interviewed for our book, A Voice to be Heard, talks about sweat equity. An interesting phrase, sweat equity. He means the effort that most entrepreneurs put into the early years of establishing a company when they do not take any money out of the company. They go unpaid. In a similar way, if our investment choices take us down an equity route rather than a reaping of interest route, we need to be prepared for sacrifice. The value of equity investments goes down as well as up. We may lose money as well as gain it. If the investment is in a worthwhile business, most often we will gain in the long run, but we need to be patient. Not panicking is a very good rule of thumb for an investor. And so is spreading your investments, advice which we actually find in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 11, verse 1. Divide your means 7 ways, or even 8, for you do not know what disaster will happen on earth. There is indeed hope for business. God delights in redeeming human beings. He rejoices when repentant sinners change their ways. I believe the same is true of whole sectors of public life. God rejoices to redeem business. He delights when recalcitrant businesses change their ways. Business has contributed significantly to the mess in which we find ourselves, but it also has the potential to help lead us out of that mess. And that is something in which we all have a part to play. And then the final slide, which you originally had at the beginning, if you can bring that up again. Yeah, I'd just like to conclude by saying something by way of summary about mission and discipleship in the workplace. In my view, there are 3 key biblical commands. First of all, there is the creation mandate, which I've already talked about, the responsibility to steward the earth well. Secondly, there's the great commandment, which we find in Mark 12 and Luke 10, the command to love God and to love one's neighbor as oneself. Love interpreted by Jesus as being universal, including even the person who appears to be your enemy. Think of the parable of the Good Samaritan. The business application of this is that you love all your stakeholders. You love your employees, you love your customers, you love your suppliers, you love your investors, you love your local communities. Hopefully, you can even love your competitors. And then thirdly, the Great Commission, which we find at the end of Matthew's Gospel, the mission to go and make disciples of all nations. Notice that Jesus said disciples, not converts. Conversion is a crucial first stage, but discipleship means living in the way that Jesus wants. We are seeking converts who not only accept Jesus as Savior, but follow him as Lord. Their deeds, our deeds, way of life and practice of business should be consistent with our Christian profession. All three commands are important. I believe they interrelate and belong together. And that leads me to three questions which I invite you to discuss in your groups. So first of all, which biblical passages have you found most helpful in thinking about and practicing stewardship? That might include some of the passages that I've mentioned, but it may include some other passages. If so, please share them. Secondly, what can you do to be a good steward in the face of the climate crisis, either as an entrepreneur, as a business person, or as an investor? You may want to go back to slide 7 for that. And then thirdly, how can you integrate the three key biblical commands in the way you go about your daily work? And the slide you see before you, that reminds you of what those three key biblical commands are. So I hope those questions are helpful and that you have a very good discussion.